Good afternoon. On behalf of Akureyri Art Museum, I welcome you to this symposium on Ann Noël and the Fluxus movement. My name is Þorbjörg. I work here at the museum as a coordinator and will be chairing this symposium today. We have a few speakers. First of all, Hlynur Hallsson, the director, will have a short introduction. Pálína Guðmundsdóttir, the curator for this exhibition, will have another short introduction. Then we'll have talks from Úlfhildur Dagsdóttir over the internet. She is in Reykjavik, she is a literary scholar, and she will talk about concrete poesy and the Fluxus movement. After that, we have Jan Foss, an artist and a co-owner of Boogie Woogie in Amsterdam, which is an art bookstore, which many of you know, probably. And in the end, we'll have Ann Noël, artist herself. And she is, of course, the occasion for this symposium, her exhibition, and the fact that she is here with us. After the talks, we'll have about half an hour, maybe, of questions and answers. And I'd like, for those who want to pose a question, to just come up here. This is for the sound to be good on the recording, which will be on the internet later. And while you're listening to these interesting talks, you might want to have a glass of wine or beer or soda. Please go ahead if you like. So, Hlynur, please.
Thank you, Þorbjörg. Dear guests of the Akureyri Art Museum and dear guests that are watching this online, I say welcome to the symposium on Ann Noël and the Fluxus movement. And dear Ann, congratulations again with this powerful solo exhibitions, icons and symbols here at the museum. And I would also like to thank Guðrún Pálína Guðmundsdóttir, the curator of the exhibition and initiator of this show. And it's an honor for us to have this exhibition ongoing until January 16th, 2022. And I think it will open eyes of many people that know maybe not so much about the Fluxus movement. That had really a great impact on Icelandic art and Icelandic artists. And of course, about the art of Ann Noël. Ann Noël is born in England, 1944, and she has lived in Berlin since 1980. She has a background in graphic design, printmaking, photography, painting, and performance. In the early 80s, she became active in the Fluxus movement, participating in performances and art festivals worldwide, especially in collaboration with her husband, Emmett Williams. She is still performing within the framework of the Fluxus art group. And she has also published many of her own artist books over the years. Like I said, the exhibition will be on till mid of January next year, and I hope that in that time we will have lots of visitors, also lots of children and students. Because I think this exhibition is really interesting also for education. And that's an important part of the museum that's the museum education. I would like to thank the Museum Council of Iceland, who gave a grant for this symposium. And my thanks goes also to the staff of the museum and to the N4 TV station here in Akureyri, and to Vadim Sakharov, who was so generous to lend his documentary film on Ann Noël, and that will be shown here at the museum, and it will also be online for people to watch it at home. And of course, I would like to thank Jan Foss, Úlfhildur Dagsdóttir, and again, Ann Noël, for taking part in this symposium. Thank you.
Thank you, Linus. Now we'll have the curator and the museum teacher, museum education, in charge of that, please. Paulina. Paulina Guðmundsdóttir.
Hello and welcome. I will say a few words about why this education is here and why I organized this symposium. The reason is Ann Noël and her art. I met her through friends in Berlin some years ago, and she told me she had works in the museum Fluxus Plus in Potsdam. And she was so kind to take me to the museum, and we met the museum director, and he showed us the collection there, and it interested me and made a lot of strong impressions. And later I was with my husband and son in Budapest, and then there was a big show, Fluxus and Friends, the collection of Maria and Walter Schniepel, and there I saw Ann Noël in connection with all these artists and her books, and I was so impressed. And because my special interest in art and language, I found this connection between the artist in Fluxus from the literary part and poetry and visual artist and performance so interesting. And that is, it has been in Iceland with Dieter Roth and Magnús Pálsson, a huge influence on art here in Iceland. So, and on our poets as well. So when I was organizing this symposium, I wanted to have Úlfhildur Dagsdóttir, and I wanted also actually Vadim Sakharov to come here, but unfortunately he was not able to come. But Úlfhildur is having her speech from Reykjavik. But Jan Foss, he has been selling Ann Noël's books, and he has followed her art and knows her and her art very well. So he's going to talk about Fluxus and Ann. And finally, Ann is going to tell about her own art. And then we have different questions that we are going to ask some of those, Ann, Jan, or Úlfhildur. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulina. Now, next we have Úlfhildur from Reykjavik.
Góðan daginn og good afternoon. I would like to start by saying cheers, and I'm very sorry that I'm not able to be with you in location, but looking forward to see the exhibition at a later date. Now, I will be disappearing behind slides, and what I will be here calling concrete poetry is a many-headed beast. When Googled, this definition comes up. Poetry in which the meaning or effect is conveyed partly or wholly by visual means, using patterns or words or letters and other typographical devices. A classic example of this is The Mouse's Tale from Alice in Wonderland, published in 1965, where the story of the mouse takes the form of the tale of the mouse, complete with a play on words, tail, and tail. Now, however helpful this definition is, it's, in my opinion, way too limited, as indeed is often the case in literature and art. But I think it's a good starting point with my rather broad discussion here on concrete poetry or the interaction between words, symbols, and images. So here I will start by mentioning Dieter Roth's work with concrete poetry, then move on to a contemporary Icelandic writer called Óskar Árni Óskarsson, and also discuss definitions of comics. And finally, if there is time, I will be looking at a few examples from contemporary comic artists. Dieter Roth was a man of many arts. According to Icelandic art critic Aðalsteinn Ingólfsson, his work with texts and books was what he enjoyed the most. Roth treated books like visual objects, creating many versions of artists' books. And here we hopefully see a slide. Are my slides not visible? The slides are kind of the main thing. Yeah, here it is. Good. So this is the first addition that I would like to add to the definition above. Concrete poetry can take the form of a book as an object containing letters, words, and images. And we see here two examples from Roth's books. These are both from the work Ideogram from 1959. But according to Aðalsteinn, he started doing this work already in 1953. We see here the play on typography, where letters and typographic symbols, punctuation marks, and stuff like that are being used to create forms, patterns, and images. These images are clearly concrete poetry, but they're also a part of an artist book as a work of concrete poetry. Another work by Dieter Roth called Stupidogram, originally done in 1979, but as you can see here, it's signed 1983. It's another version of concrete poetry, Here, Roth takes a punctuation mark, a comma, and lines it up on a page as if it were a text to be read. Then he circles one comma as if the text is being annotated or emphasized somehow. This is the real comma, or this is the comma of the greatest importance. Let's continue with the commas. This is an example of Óskar Árni Óskarsson's concrete poetry. We see that a comma has been singled out, appearing in a dramatic poem called The Last Drop of Rain. Some people, and they are the I's, the lowercase i's there, they stand under a cloudy sky, these are the brackets, and a single drop, a comma, is falling. More commas appear in this visual rendering of a famous line, Singing in the Rain. The poem is written on a typewriter, giving it an organic and retro look, using typographic symbols and one letter to create a vivid image of a streetlight in a cobblestone street, a man swinging around the pole in a rain of commas again. Óskar Árni Óskarsson published his first book of poems without words in 1997. This was the time where typewriters were disappearing fast. So the book was a kind of an ode to old tech. Since then, he has returned to the form again and again, and his most recent publications have taken the form of artist books, as you see here on this slide, published in limited editions in 2016 and 2020. The one from 2016, the one on the left, is a collection of loose pages put in a folder, and finally the folder is placed in a cloth bag. These poems have been exhibited in the Reykjavik City Library and in a small gallery in the Reykjavik City Center. And thus we can also add to the definition above that concrete poetry can take the form of visual art mounted on walls. And that is indeed probably what you are seeing all around you in Ann's exhibition. Before we move on to explore more of Óskar Árni's poetry, I wish to continue to add to the definition of concrete poetry using comics as tools. There are many definitions of comics, but the most basic one, and probably the first one, was explained by another Swiss artist, Rodolph Töpfer, in the early 19th century. And here we see the definition and also an example of his picture, play on picture and words. Basically, Töpfer pointed out that in drawings where there is an interplay between pictures and words, the sum of pictures and words together can become larger than the parts. He said, loosely translated, the pictures by themselves mean little, as do the words. Together they create something new. And this is, in my opinion, a key description for understanding concrete poetry. Whether it is on a single page or in an artwork, or taking the form of an artist book. Now let's look at more examples from Óskar Árni. The poem is a text, letters, words, punctuation marks, much like Rhodes' example from above. However, the text takes different forms. A part of it is a conventionally readable text, words that form a title, in this case, A Funeral in the Rain. Another part forms an image where letter and typographical symbols are used to build a picture of a funeral in the rain. Again, the commas form the rain. The I's, the lowercase i's, are people, and the brackets are here used to construct a neat little coffin. Here we have an excellent example of how the words say little on their own, the image not much either, but together they create something brand new, and the sum is something much bigger than the individual parts. My students have, throughout the years, enjoyed interpreting this poem. "Who's the one standing alone?" asked a young man who had previously announced his complete disinterest in poetry. "The mistress," another one answered. Another group of students were more bloodthirsty and guessed that the single I is the murderer, and the group of 3 bystanders are cops. This goes to show how a few letters and punctuation marks can create all kinds of stories and even long narratives. There's also a lot of humor in Óskar Árni's poems, as seen in his most recent effort, where he goes on a spree in a poem called The Houses on Weird Street. Here he uses all sorts of symbols and letters to build a complex and strange architecture. And on the street, we see a group of familiar people, the lowercase i's, as well as a bus and 2 cars. The humor is not only in the images themselves and the various games with letters and symbols, but is also found in the joy of rediscovering language and letters in new and exciting forms. And as well, to recreate the possibilities of poetry and text in these highly strange images. This is something that Aðalsteinn also describes in Dieter Rhodes' artist books, the fulfillment found in this process of metamorphosis. At the same time, we are reminded of the graphic qualities of letters. They are not only meaningful units, they're also visual signs. In addition to this each letter has many forms, as seen in the vast world of typography. Again, something that is in one of the artworks from Ann. Design of letter has its history and meanings, and this is what concrete poetry reminds us of, the tangibility and visual opportunities of letters and other typographical symbols. Here we see a dense forest of typographic signs forming a hidden image where the title, Little Red Riding Hood and the Wolf, gives us a good clue, but it takes a while to figure it out. Images are, of course, a very important component in poetry. Poetry is the most visual form of literature, in the form of written texts, that is, where language is used to create images in the mind of the reader. In concrete poetry, this idea is taken further, as seen in the works of Dieter Rhodes and Óskar Árni. Óskar is not only working with how words can induce images, he takes the words apart and analyzes their compositions, that is, the letters. In his Poetry Without Words, he unravels the words, separating them into their basic units, the letters, and examines their visual potential. And here we have an example of how Óskar Árni illustrates a poem. And please excuse my bad, very literal translation of this wonderfully beautiful poem by Ingibjörg Haraldsdóttir. Another key element in poetry is how flexible it is and how it offers up a world of interpretations. The compositions of words is often geared towards more than one reading. And in Óskar's Árni case, we see how the composition of letters and signs can do the same thing. This goes for concrete poetry in general. They reveal, due to their deceptive simplicity, how the seemingly simple contains a myriad of meanings. Even though each poem has a title, making it readable, the title never quite captures the image, nor does it manage to contain its meaning. Any work with letters and symbols or interaction between imagery and words always opens up all kinds of possibilities for interpretation, especially in terms of the borderland concrete poetry resides in, that between literature and visual art, always including elements of both. Now, this is also the main characteristic of comics, and concrete poetry is easily comparable to comics. I will mention 2 examples here. Hugleikur Dagsson is a comic artist who specializes in the simplest of drawings, using stick figures to convey its characters and situations. Such as here, where he illustrates a famous punk song. Again, we witness a dialogue of images and words that clash and conjure up variations of meanings. Here is a purely visual image with a reference to another famous visual image. A more poetic sentiment is here in The Darkness Surrounds Me. This one is unnamed, but here we see how he creates a contrast between the very realistically drawn bombs and the very unrealistic character. And then finally, another impressive visual composition. You're in the army now. I also want to mention another comic artist, Lóa Hjálmtýsdóttir. Her imagery is not as simple as Hugleikur's, but her play with forms and the interplay between words and images is not far from concrete poetry. The text reads, "What is for dinner?" And the image is a surrealistic take on the isolation during the coronavirus, where people living in the same house become even more involved in each other's lives, much more than they probably would like. This is another take on life during the coronavirus, a more realistic this time. And here, more coronavirus life moments. The text reads, "I thought I would learn to play piano, grow vegetables in the kitchen window, and read 10 books. And again, we see how the graphic elements of speech are put in black, making the utterance stronger. And again, we have a surrealistic or even Dada view of the individual as a kind of a litter pile, where colors and patterns are used to create an immediately familiar scene. Or I expect this is a familiar scene for many of us. Now, finally, more for the sake of fun than anything else. A wonderful illustration of a classic Icelandic love poem, where the lover is describing how his steps are so light when he's going to meet his loved one. Loa turns this into a refrain as he is trying, or the woman in the picture is trying to step lightly, being clearly blind drunk. So that concludes my presentation, and I will probably be seeing you again later for discussion and questions.
So, next talk we have from Jan Foss. Please, Jan.
Thank you for having me here, and maybe I can fold the laptop lid. Oh. Okay, this will do it. I have prepared 3 pages with a text which I titled, "What is Fluxus?" And the first line under the title reads, you are expecting it already. Don't expect me to answer that. I can't, not in 10 minutes, and not because, well, simply, I don't know myself what Fluxus is. I mean, how is one to know what anything is, anything at all? Nothing is. All is in flux and will be different tomorrow. It's a question for philosophers and not for simple souls like us. But when Paulina asked me to say something in regard to Fluxus, I said I would do that. So here we go. But it won't be more than a few unconnected bits. Ann Noël, the artist whose work are on the walls around us here, has spent her life at the site of Emmett Williams, and Emmett Williams is one of the big names of Fluxus, and has indeed made it a part of her work as an artist to be sort of a diary keeper of Fluxus. She could be a far more reliable source of all information about Fluxus than I am. And by the way, the internet is, of course, full of writings about Fluxus. I've made a brief list of a few rather random observations. If this disappoints you and you want to get up and go out now, let me try to hold you back by saying these observations did lead me to something which I think can help to explain a puzzling phenomenon, something about the art world of your country, of Iceland. Okay, I'll begin. Point number 1. There are 11 points. In my experience, people that relate to Fluxus like to laugh. Those of you, here comes a. I was going to compare 2 people which I assumed would be present here. Eggert Einarsson, a friend from Reykjavik, had several times said he was definitely coming today, but he's not here. So we can't have his laughter. Eggert is an enormous, he has an enormous laughter. But I was going to say that laughter is less impressive after all than Ann Noël's laughter. Eggert is naturally gifted, and has been through the school or to the school of Dieter Roth and Hermann Nietzsche, which is in comparison to having gone through the school of Emmett and his friends little. So I think that Ann wins the first prize for laughing. If I was a Fluxus artist, I myself, I would love performances. I would write the score for a performance where everybody laughs and laughs. Laughter, please, let's all laugh. Happening and performance, male art, concrete poetry. When you hear those words, you are likely on or near Fluxus territory. And next point. I hear the word Fluxus was brought into existence by George Maciunas. For the inventor, it referred to a group of artists towards whom he behaved as some sort of impresario. It has also been said that Maciunas saw himself as a general, with the artists being his troops. Then to understand the word Fluxus as a name of a marketing concept which Maciunas developed would also be okay with me. But you have to keep in mind, I really don't know anything about this George Maciunas. I have never met him. But I understand that the early Dixieland jazz poster typography of Fluxus was Maciunas' invention. Is that so? Yes. Yeah. There was a very typical recognizable layout to many early multiples and boxes, and what was published in Fluxus context, recognizable through its black and white typography. Big letters, wood block letters, I think. Fluxus artists, we are already at point 7. Fluxus artists seem not so much to exhibit their work. This seems to be a bit of an exception, really. They are more sort of creators of festivals or events or maybe Málþings. I mean, this is maybe something it sort of filters down to. I mean, here, this is a performance. We are performing at this moment. So it's Fluxus saved in this small corner here. Eighth point, as far as I know, Fluxus was never outspokenly directed against anything. But still it failed to express a notion of discontent with how things were. It set itself off against an art world, already in the early 60s, quite overheated art world. You realize it is this time that pop art is launched and sky-high prices and art dealers, I mean, making really big deals. And those guys who were rather, I mean, stayed poor more or less all their life. I mean, has any Fluxus artist actually gotten rich with this art?
Some of them live pretty well, like Namjoon Paik.
Yeah, Namjoon Paik would be, yeah, okay.
Gets quite
Yeah, okay, but she got it from somewhere else,
well,
maybe.
she got it from her first husband, actually from her family,
Yeah.
then her first husband, then her third husband.
Right.
We all know.
Yes. So I mean, there are some who were more clever than others, maybe, but or part of that game than others. But most of them, I think, were sort of going on very modest means through life. So just being against anything, there is. I mean, I have a strong notion. Always had a strong notion that Fluxus was. I mean, the laughter of it was sort of a rejection of a world which had easily been corrupted into something which, for those artists, then did not feel to be an attractive way to go. And then does Fluxus have no roots in earlier art movements? And clearly Dada comes to mind. Number 10, I had the privilege as a young man to get to know one of the Fluxus artists quite well, a Frenchman, Robert Filiou. We shared the studio for 2 or 3 years. He stayed prominent in my mind for all this time, for having put together one of the most beautiful sentences I know. It goes, "Art is what makes life more interesting than art." That you have to let that melt in your ears slowly. This is a thing which can take you many times around. For me, that sentence is Fluxus in a nutshell. And here comes my last point. And that is another profound and a profound statement which I happily quote. Ann reminded me on it the other day down here in the restaurant. It's very brief and to the point. Fluxus, Fluxus. And now I would actually say, can I not sit down and so, but I promised that I would sort of go a little bit into that phenomenon. You have in this country, maybe you don't even notice it yourself anymore, but it's been so normal maybe for you. It's grown slowly and it's now normality. But when you come from the outside, you do notice how absolutely incredibly lively the art world is here. I mean, it is really breathtaking. I mean, everybody is an artist. Everybody is happily admitting that he is an artist. Everybody is just having an exhibition, just coming from an exhibition, going to an exhibition. It's endless. it's all that. I mean, it's incredible. You don't do that in Holland, I tell you, and you don't do that in Germany. I mean, not at all like that. I mean, it's really unheard of, not to be believed. Wonderful, beautiful, deeply moving. All that without money involved, not with a noticeable bloody competition and greed and envy and all that. I mean, just a happy, like children at play. Unbelievable. So, and why is that? So, how comes? And well, I mean, okay, it's your country, as we all know, I mean, also we foreigners who sometimes come here know, has been through the centuries, through 1,000 years, really a poor country. Material of all sorts were very rare. I read somewhere that you could be executed for stealing a piece of rope, 1750. I mean, you don't hang pictures up on the wall if you get executed for stealing a piece of rope. You did not have any, you did not have any access to oil paint. Runa Sorkelsdotter, with whom we do the shop in Amsterdam, has a great-grandfather who lived in Kjos, in Hvalfjörður, and it's documented. In 1880, he was the first, obviously the first, he's the first known Icelander to mail order from Copenhagen oil paint, brushes, canvas, and the easel. He went out into the nature and painted somewhere beyond his house the mountains. And those paintings are left over. This is, I mean, something which became reality only a bit more than 100 years ago in this country. art was the only artist material available, freely available, and the only artist material which you achieved a high degree of ability to bend and treat it, are words. You have literature, poetry as your art. And we are still thinking that we are speaking of visual arts. We do, though we call it, for Fluxus art is an exception, that it is an exhibition on the wall. And we go to exhibitions. We don't really go all that often to poetry readings. But I think the Icelandic heart would actually beat quite as strongly for poetry readings as it would, or more strongly even, than for visual arts. And the link, the connection which brought the visual into the written arts, I think that is Fluxus. In 1970, or also before, in the years before, in the 60s, a few people, outstandingly among them Magnus Paulsson in Reykjavik, realized what was going on in the world out there and kept track of the going-ons around Fluxus. Knew some of the artists, got to know some of the artists, invited that Robert Filiou, which I quoted here, to Iceland, to Myndlista- og Handíðaskólinn, and later also to the mob shop he organized in Snæfellsnes. He got himself his own branch of Filiou's teaching and learning as performing arts. The Kensler tapes, which Magnus published, are proof of that. I think that at the moment that in Myndlista- og Handíðaskólinn in Reykjavik in 1972, the nýlistadeildin was opened on the request or as an action of this Magnus. At this moment, the wave or that development, which we are now noticing with amazement, began. I think that moment where it was not that you, as a young artist, were requested or thought that you were requested to paint, set flowers on the windowsill, but print a postcard with a more or less clever sentence on it. That was a moment where this poetic conceptualism, which is now, I think, the style name of what is happening in Iceland, that began, or the first formative years were those in that art school in Reykjavik in the 70s, and certainly at the end of the 70s when Gallery Zoom gave up, and instead of it, Nýlistasafnið Nilo was started with that unbelievable, breathtaking name. I mean, imagine what a name, and it's unclear who invented it. The Living Art Museum. I mean, imagine that. Somebody cooked up the Living Art Museum. What an invention to call an art institute the Living Art Museum. That is Fluxus. Where would it otherwise come from? Okay, I have now not read what I said here, but I think I've said everything which it says here. Okay. I wanted to have that joke once more. And is that change now? Is this what Iceland has developed into? And is that change is that a change to the better or to the worse? And then be careful, you know. Fluxus, Fluxus, Fluxus. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jan, for a fun talk. We're all artists. I like that, speaking as an artist. So, to conclude, we have Ann Noël, the creator of this museum, the art in this museum, this hall gallery. Please, Ann.
Yes. Actually, somebody asked George Maciunas, is it Fluxus or Fluxus? And he said it's Fluxus because it rhymes with Fluxus. Yes. Yes, that's right. And so you made 11 points, and I was thinking that, you know, one of my favorite books, which is an artist's book, it's a poem, it's a concrete poem, it's Sweethearts by Emmett Williams, which has 11 letters in the word. And out of these 11 letters, he made a page with the sweethearts, sweethearts, sweethearts filling up the page. And then he took the letters in the order in which they came, and he composed poems out of every page. So she eats sweet ears, or whatever came, you know. She sees him, his, you know, whatever, mom. So I can't quote you, but, and then the second half of the book becomes a kind of a visual poem which you can flip through and simulates an orgasm. So the sweethearts are about making love towards the end of the book, and it's a beautiful book, and I think it's 90 pages, and you know, and it inspired me very much. And this is, you know, I was involved with concrete poets when I was a student in England, and the first one was John Furnival. He was a visual poet who made the Tower of Babylon, for example, with languages, making a tower on a page, and he was my teacher, and he was in touch with concrete poets all over the world, and he asked them to send just one-liners, and the students in his classes were asked to then create a print, a visual poem out of these one-liners. And I chose a line by Ian Hamilton Finlay. He was a Scottish poet living in Lanarkshire, and it was Water Wheels Whirl. And I made a print from water wheels whirl with the whirl, whirl, whirl like a water wheel, you know. And I started a correspondence with Ian Hamilton Finlay. And he was always, you know, he built a garden with poems in it and things floating on ponds, and there was wee little this and wee little that. He was Scots, you know. But then he had also a poem which was built on one word, and that word was acrobats. And my second project with him was to make print versions of acrobats where those letters also in a block would dance across the page. So it was a question of setting them typographically so that the letters danced. And I made two versions in letterpress, and I made the third version as a two-color silkscreen print, orange letters on a blue background where they really danced. And that was the one that was then published by the Tarask Press, and which is now in all the museums. And also my teacher, one of my teachers at Bath Academy of Art, was Hans-Jörg Meyer, who was a young man who came to England for a concrete poetry show organized by Jascha Reichert at the ICA in London, and he just stayed. He was a typographer, had learned typography, and he made type poems. But he also was a publisher. As a very young man, he was publishing, first of all, big broadsheets by concrete poets all over the world whom he visited. And he folded them up and put them into Sammelbände, so collected works in boxes. And then he was also the man who started publishing all the books by Dieter Roth. Everything that Dieter ever did, he published. And he allowed Dieter to do whatever he wanted, essentially. So Dieter would have an idea for a book, and Hansjörg would realize, and it didn't matter what it was. And he made this whole series of 40 volumes that you think you saw in that slide there, you know, and lots of beautiful little books that he made small books in A4, like Emmett Williams' Sweethearts he also published. He published Robert Filiu, he published Richard Hamilton in London, Andre Tompkins. I mean, he was a phenomenon, Hansjörg Mayr. And I went to work with him after I finished art school at the end of 68, in the middle of 68. I went to work for him. He was then middle 20s, and he was having a retrospective of his work at the Hague, in Holland. So this was amazing. All of his publications, his own works, his prints, and I was completely blown away, you know. And I was thrilled with the idea of artist books, and I began immediately to want to work with artist books and printing, and that's what I did. I then, from Hansjörg Mayr, I went to work in New York at the Something Else Press, which was run by Dick Higgins, a Fluxus artist. And the editor there was Emmett Williams, who was, you know, also a Fluxus artist and a poet, and whose work I knew. He had done the Anthology of Concrete Poetry in 1967, and it was one of the first books I ever bought in that genre. So needless to say, after a few months, I began going out with Emmett Williams, and we eventually married in 1970 and spent the next 37 years together until he died. And so immediately in New York, I was meeting all of the Fluxus artists, and a lot of them were musicians because it was like supposedly new music, except that, you know, it was everything except actually playing the instrument. It was preparing to play the instrument. It was putting flowers on the piano. It was nailing down the piano keys. It was building a tower of blocks on top of the piano that got knocked over at the end so it would make resounding sounds on the piano. It was preparing to play a musical instrument and then putting the instrument down. So it was everything but actually making music. And this is the very first Fluxus Festival in Wiesbaden in 1962. Shocked the people so much because they all came to hear the new music and there wasn't any. And they had people actually destroying a piano, and that got into the newspapers. And anything that gets into the newspapers will make it famous overnight. So Fluxus became famous, and all of these people, as Jan pointed out, were not making any money, but they were having a hell of a fine time, like performing together, you know? And so they met all over the place. They went to Copenhagen, they went to Paris, they did festivals wherever they could on a shoestring. George Maciunas was trying to save money all the time. He organized all these festivals, and he would like ask people to go and buy secondhand light bulbs. Well, you know, that's not easy to buy a secondhand light bulb, you know, and things like that. So, and trying to organize, making everyone frugal. He didn't want anyone to smoke or drink, but you can't ask artists not to smoke or drink, especially in those days, you know, so. And, so I did meet George Maciunas. I met him in New York, and he was a pretty strange guy. He was a Lithuanian, you know, who came to America because he had to escape the country with his family, and he lived like a monk, really. He had, you know, he lived first of all in New York on Worcester Street, where he lived in the basement underground so that he could rent the things above to make money to support the Fluxus artists. He paid for everything. And he worked as a designer. And then he got this amazing job to go work as a designer for the American Air Force. And that's why he went to Wiesbaden. And Emmett Williams was then in Darmstadt working for the Stars and Stripes newspaper as their features editor. So actually, Fluxus was then supported by the Army and the Air Force, which was pretty funny, you know. So, you know, so anyway, this group, of course, they were in touch with each other. It wasn't mail art in those days, you just wrote letters. And people like, you know, Emmett Williams, who was a poet, wrote brilliant letters. I have just been asked if I would edit a new book that Hansjörg Mayr is going to publish of the correspondence between Emmett Williams and Dieter Roth, which I'm happily going to do because it's delightful to read the letters, you know. Hans-Jörg Meyer lives in London, and he was going through a closet in one of his flats there, and he found a big binder full of all of the correspondence from his authors. And so he's copying it and sending it to me, and I shall have the pleasure of reading all the letters. I already read the ones that are in Hamburg right now, and that was delightful because I found a letter where Emmett Williams is writing to Dieter Roth, "Oh, this girl, Ann, has just come to the Something Else press," you know, so this was very fine. You know? And just the best thing that's happened in a long time, you know, so okay. But in fact, I did not have a good time working at the Something Else press because the man who ran the press, Dick Higgins, was a great performer, but he was a really unpleasant man to work with. And he wanted me to be answering the telephone because I had a British accent at the time, a very much stronger one than I have now. And he thought it sounded very posh to have someone answering the telephone for him that way, you know. And I wanted to be making books, you know. Yes, right. He sent everything out. That was the other thing. And the other part of my job was to phone every day to find out why these printers weren't on time and why he wasn't getting proofs back. And, you know, and I mean, it was horrible. It was a horrible job. So I stuck it out for 1 year. And then I told Dick that I was going back to England. And in fact, I didn't. I went to Lexington, Kentucky, where Emmett was then artist in residence. So that was that. So in the meantime, the diary thing. So this is the Conflux diary idea. I saw Dieter Roth's diary in 1967 when I was working for Hans-Jörg Meyer, and it convinced me that I should start writing a diary myself because I was going abroad, I was going to New York, I was going to meet all of these interesting people, I should write down the names and my impressions at the time and so on. So I started doing that. And I'm still writing a diary now, so it's a habit I cannot give up. But at a certain point, it was too much information, and a lot of the information was not so relevant, except to myself. So I decided to make an abbreviated diary with only the names, the dates, the places. And I color them so that you can see what activities I'm involved in at the time. And the thing is that there is this expression in German, man isst, was man isst. You are what you eat. And I say, you are also the person that you are eating with. It's very important because you're sharing ideas, and drinking with, of course, because you're sharing ideas all the time. And, you know, because of the people who are surrounding you, you pick up ideas, you discuss ideas, and you work together on many things. So this became, for me, the basis of all my work. Of course, everything here reflects what I have been taught by the people that I've been working with during my life. And I don't live alone in the world, you know, so I can't say I did it first, you know. And I was very interested to look at these little poems that we saw earlier with the lowercase i's as people, because, of course, I didn't know these poems. But, of course, I thought immediately of the lowercase I as little people. And being a typographer, you know, it was fascinating to me that the most simple letter of the alphabet, just a line and a dot, can be so different, just like people, right? We are none of us identical, unless we happen to have, you know, like an identical twin sister or something. But you know, so I started collecting these I's during the me generation in California, when everyone was saying, I am, I did it first, you know, I am, you know, yeah. So, and I thought, well, you know, I was going to take part in a faculty show, and I thought, wouldn't it be great if I could make like eyes, you know, and then like put people like on a coconut shy, you know, stand them up there. A coconut shy is when you throw coconuts at someone sitting on a seat over a tub of water, and if you happen to hit the right place, you can tip the person in the water. And I thought, this would be a great idea, you know, we'll do that with all of these important artists at CalArts. I was at CalArts at the time. I never got to realize that project, but I had the collection of eyes. And I went on collecting them, and then I thought, I'm going to make a book out of these. And so that's why they're gradually changing from these 6 columns, gradually changing from the very first eyes ever made in wood type. Then they go through the the sans serif ones, the serif ones, the italic ones, you're just going through all of them. And I made a book I made a 405-page book, which I called You, with the Rainer Verlag in Berlin in 1980. And Rainer was he was like Hans-Jörg May. He was making books for artists, and I had the good luck to meet him as soon as I got to Berlin. Dorothy Anoni, who was one of our friends from New York already, she told me that if I went to Rainer and asked him for paper, he would give me paper to work on. So I went to Rainer, and he gave me all of this lovely white paper, and I started making the drawings of the lowercase i's. And I made them big. They were 30 by 40 centimeters, big enough to be imposing. And when I took the suitcase full of drawings to show to Rainer, he was totally blown over, and he said, "We're going to make a book," And so he made the book A4, the deluxe book. And there's also a little tiny one, which is A6. They're both lovely, beautifully printed. He printed the pages twice in black, so they'd be really black, and he just took endless trouble. So this was that. And then as this book was published, I was offered an exhibition in the DAD gallery in Berlin, which was the gallery where artists coming to Berlin had their exhibitions. And there were 5 rooms in this then house where it was. It was in Henny Porten's house. She was an important actress in Berlin. Everyone knew her. And so there were 5 little rooms. So in one room, I had all the drawings, just floor to ceiling, the whole drawing. And another room, I made these paintings. So they were also made in 1982. And I just chose the real letters, and then I saw the artists in them. I said, yes, that's Dorothy. Yes, that's Namjoon Paik. Yes, that's... So I actually saw artists as the letter I. It showed me something about their character or the work they were doing, some aspect of their work. So that's how that piece came about. And I've never combined the paintings and the drawings before on one wall the way I have here, but I rather like the result. And then, the other thing was that we never had much money, as Jan can probably affirm, but you made art with whatever was lying around the house. And it happened that Emmett Williams and Robert Filliou and many other artists liked to drink a lot of wine. We always had wine in the house, and then there were these corks lying around the next day. And I was also doing things with rubber stamps, letters and things like that, so I had rubber stamp pads. So I started stamping the ends of the corks with a rubber stamp pad, and they were making nice little black images. And there's a text by Leonardo da Vinci where he says, if you stare long enough at a spot on the wall, you will start to see landscapes and portraits and maybe even battle scenes, And I always saw the faces. So, in vino veritas, in wine is truth, So I found these images, and they were only 2 centimeters, a bit too small. So I put them in an enlarger, a photographic enlarger, and I blew them up, to fit onto a DIN A4 page, so 21 by 21. And then by printing the corks at different pressures, you get different images, So then I would take 4 of the most diverse ones, the lightest one to the darkest one, and then print them over each other in colors to create the portraits. And so that was a lot of fun. And I did this as silk screens first, but then came the computer age, and now I can do it in the computer. I don't have a silk screen studio anymore. So I can now do this in Adobe Illustrator in the computer and print them out with, beautiful colored inks and mount them onto canvases the way I've done there. So that's the story of that one. And this one was another project. After I'd done the You book with Rainer Pretzel, he said, do you think you could possibly make another book with numbers? The Arabics, this is called, because the Arabic numbers 0 to 9. And so I started making collages with all the numbers that I could find in newspapers, magazines. I was going through trash cans and taking out the magazines and the newspapers and cutting out the numbers and collaging them together. And the book Arabics from from the Rainer Verlag is on yellow paper printed in shades of gray. But I had then all of these black and white images for the book. and was invited to a copy art show. So copy art being something quite, popular in the 1990s. And so I made this piece for a copy art show called Copygraphic. I can't even remember. Anyway, it was a show in Rochester, New York, and then there was another show that I took part in Vancouver that then went to Montreal. So I had to have a piece that I could pack up small and send, that would be easy to ship. And I made this piece. And all of these images are produced on the copy machine. I chose all the different colored papers I could get. And then I found machines in different shops that had different colored toners in them. So that, here there are 5 colored toners: blue, red, brown, green, black, and white as well. So then I made the combinations, and this is like 1 to 9 across the top and 1 to 9 down the side, and then, so I'd get a real scheme going, and then the same number of ones printed in red, in brown, and you can see in the little catalog that I printed my drawing for how I went about planning this piece. And then after I printed the colored toners on the colored backgrounds, I then took a matte film, adhesive film for the last layer. And this black on the top of these is then the adhesive film, which is mounted onto the colored paper, which also makes it a bit stronger and gives it a finish, And then all of these A4 prints are joined together with an acid-free tape that you can buy. It's called Filmoplast P20. And it's a wonderful tape. It's very strong. And I've made lots and lots of objects out of this, wall-hanging size pieces using this tape. And yes, so that's the story of that piece. And I just really enjoy, I really love to make a scheme and follow it through, to create something by losing myself for a day or 3 or 4 or 5 in some kind of project where, I'm completely, like the color key, exactly how am I going to paint all of these names so that you can see exactly whom I was eating with or working with or playing with, over the course of, this is 3 years, that piece. And this piece is also, it starts before COVID, and then COVID creeps in, and the colors gradually go out of my life as I'm shut at home and not able to go out and eat with people anymore, and I'm eating by myself. And then, towards the end of that piece, the purple creeps in. The purple are Zoom conferences. It's the only time that I really get to see people is on Zoom conferences, So, and eating at home all the time by myself, and it's very boring. So, yes. Okay, I think that's all I have to say now.
Thank you very much, Anne. This was interesting. I can remind you of an artist talk with Anne that's going to be on Thursday, September 30th at 5 o'clock. So please come if you're interested. Now we'll have a few minutes of questions and answers. Yes, please have some drinks, a bite to eat. Oop, 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 oop. So I hope someone has a question. If not, I can start with one. Now I've become very interested in Fluxus, of course. And I was wondering, it started as a very interdisciplinary community of all kinds of artists, designers, composers, visual artists. Is it still like this, or has the focus gone mostly towards visual art, or is it like this, welcoming everyone still? Or
yeah, I think that a lot of young people are very interested in...
And maybe you come up here.
Yes. Okay. Bring my wine with me. Yeah. I think that young people are very interested in Fluxus these days because the ideas are still fresh. You know, it seems fresh to them, and it gives them a kind of a way to express themselves in a looser way than perhaps they are taught. You know, you can actually be taught how to be a performance artist these days, but it's not always very good because, you know, the people who are teaching are not usually the best performers, you know, so, you know, and they tend, you know, an awful lot of very young, attractive women in leotards who kind of do gymnastics and they think it's called performance, you know, and you know, and it's just not so interesting, you know. We need to laugh, right? I mean, you know, at the best, but if you're a Fluxus performer, you do not laugh yourself. You keep a straight face and you perform it the best way you can and as serious as you possibly can, because you shouldn't be looking like you're having fun, even if you are, you know. Yeah, so.
Yes. Paulina will come up and pose her question, and it's to you, I suppose.
Thank you, Ann. It was so interesting to hear. But I have one question. Next year, Fluxus movement will be 60 years. How is that going to be celebrated?
Yes.
Please tell us.
Yes. Well, you can imagine if the first Fluxus concerts were in 1962, a few of those artists have gone on to other pastures now, you know, and there are less original Fluxus artists around to perform, and the ones who are still around are getting on a bit. So they've decided that for the 60th anniversary of Fluxus in Wiesbaden next year, they're going to celebrate the women in Fluxus rather than the men. And it was born in the 60s, but this festival will be called Sex Ties. So they're just putting the sex in there, you know. And so anyway, and there are a few women still around who are performing. Alison Knowles is still performing, even though she's beginning to lose her memory a bit. And of course, there's Dear Yoko, and yes, and there are one or two other interesting women who, Simone Forti is still dancing, I believe, and I believe I will be invited also to make an exhibition in Wiesbaden. And they will also celebrate the ones who have passed away by showing their performances, or, you know, there's Carolee Schlemann, and there are some interesting people whose work we can now view again, who were always kind of, you know, we were always in the background as artists' wives because, you know, they were the ones, right? You know, and I was always performing and happy to perform with Fluxus artists, but I was always not quite Fluxus, you know, because, you know, I was only Emmett's wife, right? You know, yeah.
More questions?
Well, I think Fluxus artists have been influenced also by artists before. Is it like an artist like Kurt Schwitters, who is connected to Dada? Had he a lot of influence on Fluxus artists? Because he was with concrete poetry, letters, sounds, performance.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Anyone else, please?
Yeah, thank you, Ann and Jan and Ulfhildur for a very different and very nice talks. And my question also goes to the star of the day, to Ann Noël. I want to ask you because and it's very interesting to I hope that I will be able to see the exhibition next year in Wiesbaden, and I'm very happy that after these 60 years the spotlight gets on the women. So that's about time, I guess. But it would be interesting for us to know what influence the Fluxus art has had on the younger generation of artists. I mean, we know that in Iceland at this time, when I was at the art school in Reykjavik, we heard about Robert Fillieu and at this mixed media department, lots of their works influenced us. And I mean, like Úlfhildur said, that also had it was affecting poets and concrete poetry, like Paulina has been mentioning. But it would be nice to hear from you, and I mean then the real younger generation, like young artists today, what they can take from Fluxus to work with.
I think, I think it's more about rejecting many of the things that they're being taught and just composing new ways to approach performance and new things to perform with. That it can be, of course, voice. I could say that they're not so young anymore. There's a group of performance artists in Berlin, die Mahlwerker, the mouth workers, who are still performing Fluxus pieces. And they are now also composing concerts using scores and performance pieces by other musicians and artists, and they perform the pieces as though, as well as they can, which is what you do if you're a Fluxus performer. And they can be about almost anything. They're actually going to sing this wall in the middle of October, which is going to be quite interesting. I have no idea what it's going to sound like, but they see it as a musical score. So, and they do all kinds of things. They also do street art. During the COVID time, they would make a concert in a courtyard and they'd be singing out the windows around the courtyard and getting audience participation. And they record people talking on the street and play it back. And it's just an openness about it. So, to be inventive, to use everything.
More questions? Or comments? Or short talks? Yes. Well, we could also, yes? Mm-hmm. Paulina, please.
No one is going to ask anything, then I want to thank you, Ann and Jan Foss and Bobba and Sinur and Úlfhildur as well.
Remind them to watch the film.
Yeah, and the film downstairs in the museum, Ann Noël, it is from last year. Vadim Sakharov made it, and you will be able to see it on our website and also this symposium. And thank you all people inside here. Pleasure to see you here. Bye and thank you.
Yes, I think we'll conclude this with these nice words from Paulina. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.